So as of now, you would have your own perspectives on the subject and what it means to you. What you would hear today is my humble opinion on what I think of it. And all fairness, you can think of it as right or wrong, and that's completely okay. Because at the end of the day, it is questioning and understanding what someone else thinks that we are all here to talk of, right? So to start, my research on the topic and the want to learn it and live it came at a point when I was called a walking volcano. And to be honest, I really understand why all of them came up with this cool name for me. But that made me want to change. Even though I know that I had a form of empathy that always existed within me, and I was passed down, it was passed down to me through the high EQ genes that I come from, I didn't practice it. I kept getting annoyed and angry at others who didn't act in a way that evolved around my expectations, simply because I didn't bother to understand them. And so began my journey of self-awareness, leading towards my life that would hopefully make me a more empathetic leader. And I think for someone like me who's lived on the other side of the equation, it makes it easier to share my path of learning. And so here we go. Right? I want to start with kind of elaborating on what I think is empathy. To me, it's the capacity that we have to try and imagine and understand what another person is feeling as they would experience a situation, not as how you would experience that same situation. So let's start with the 3 misnomers associated with being empathetic: weakness, accountability, and agreement. There is this created association of empathetic behavior with being weak and lenient. And that there is the more damaging result that it brings out, right? When I was speaking to a very capable and intelligent gentleman on this topic, he brought out a very interesting point. He said, I don't think everyone needs an empathetic leader. I mean, there are some who want a tap on their back saying, well done, chap. But then there are the others who are rough and tough and, who can ride out the way. And it was so interesting for me to listen to this, right? It opened my eyes to this perspective on what is perceived to be empathy. And it's so true. Because if you think about it, most of us associate empathy with managing and understanding people who are going through something that is perceived to be an issue, who are not performing or who are failing. But why? Because empathy is merely the concept of understanding others for who they are. And you cannot perceive them as being at either a point of strength or weakness. It is the ability of a leader to understand who in your team needs that pat on the back and who in your team doesn't. It is the ability to understand what your macho subordinate who can tough it out needs for him to be driven. So empathy is not by the weak, and it most definitely is not for the weak. The second misnomer that I want to clear out is around accountability, right? People have this misnomer that when you are empathetic, you won't be holding your subordinates accountable for what they need to achieve. Quite the contrary, because the expectations do not change. For example, when you need to give negative feedback to a person, leaders quite often shy away from it, right? And we try and sugarcoat it all the time. But if you are empathetic about how you deliver the negative feedback, you don't need to do this. I mean, I've had some really tough conversations through the years, and I've realized that whenever it has worked, it's always been when I've been raw and honest with them, because I truly believe that I will be doing wrong by them by not giving them the right feedback and not giving them that chance to improve on it. They need to hear that as their friend, I want them to improve. I want them to do well. As their leader, I need them to improve and I need them to do well. So no, having an empathetic leader does not allow you to get away with being held accountable. It simply means that you are made to understand that your strengths and weaknesses with a genuine intent of development, right? Let's take the third point. The third misnomer is that you need to agree with the person that you are being empathetic with. Now, I need to accept it is much easier when you do agree. It is much easier when you're on the same platform, right? Because we're all wired to be biased. However, showing empathy doesn't mean that you need to agree or adopt to what others believe in. You just need to acknowledge what's important to them. You need to take the time to understand it and create trust in their minds of the fact that you genuinely consider their point of view. So why is empathy important to a leader? Why is it important in leadership? Right? This is where you come to the second three, the benefits of the three benefits that you gain by being an empathetic leader. You see, when you take personalities, they differ from person to person. For instance, even if you take identical twins, nurtured under the very same environmental factors, they would still vastly differ. Now, these differing personalities are what you will find in a team of human beings that you lead. The most difficult to accept and yet the most critical to understand as leaders are these two factors. One is that you as a leader is but one such personality. Being the leader does not give you any right over the others to impose your personality on them. Two, each personality and the resultant behavior it spins off should not be defined or interpreted as good, bad, right, wrong, or ugly, right? It just needs to be accepted first in order for it to be understood. Now, I do think that that level of understanding and that level of acceptance in a leader takes a great deal of energy, right? And I do think that it could drain an average individual. And so you need to be strong and confident, and in my point of view, a little radical to be genuinely capable of such a character. If you do possess such a character as a leader, then together with your team, you can collectively decide what behavior is fair and beneficial for your team. And in doing so is when you gain these three things: deep connections, insights, and trust. And these three put together is what drives productivity, hands down. They take risks responsibly. Why? Because the fear of failure is taken away with the trust. They get more creative and you get more creative because the stress levels are less and you are all much calmer. They'll go that extra mile for the team because of the deep connections that you've established. And you and your team together would be solving the right problem because you now have accurate insights, really, by understanding it effectively. Now, while I was thinking of what to bring out in why empathy is needed in a leader, I thought I'd send out this question to some members in my team. And I asked them, do you believe that a leader needs a high level of emotional intelligence and empathy? And if so, why? I'm going to read out to you one of the answers that I got from one of my team members. Right? She said, empathy is a special talent which differentiates a true leader from the others. Leading people with empathy creates a special bond among teammates. It automatically generates the want in everyone to improve in every aspect of professional and personal life. Listen to this. It is a good way of getting more output from people with less input that will otherwise require a considerable amount of pressure. Honestly, isn't it any leader's dream to get that kind of understanding of what empathy is from one of your team members? So as I said, I really am one lucky woman. Now we've understood what my take on empathy is and the power of living it as a leader, which brings us to how, right? And I mean, I do believe that all of us are born with different levels of empathy built into our DNA. And I definitely believe that we all have the ability to acquire it to a certain extent and improve on it. What allows a person to be empathetic? What allows a person to be more emotionally intelligent, for that matter? To me, it boils down to the 5, right? 5 steps that I am trying out in my life. Number 1, or first step, is to be self-aware and vulnerable. It always starts with you, right? I mean, they say that empathy is the ability to get into someone else's shoes, but how do you get into someone else's shoes when you're not very well aware of the shoes that you're wearing? See, being self-aware is easy, but being accepting of who you really are and being vulnerable with it, that takes a lot of courage and guts. You need to create an environment amongst your team that allows them to put their hand up and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this and I need some help. And the only way that you do that is if you are vulnerable enough to put your hand up and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. You know, I don't know this. I need some help. Now, what this does is put you on an equal footing. I'm going to share a story with you, right? So there's something that I do with my kids where I give them the chance at night, kind of tell me one thing that they want me to change as their mother so that I become a better mother for them. I mean, trust me, they go to town with it at times and they do try their luck with very unfair requests, but we manage. But I still remember the first time I brought this up and I spoke to them and I said, you know, darling, is nowhere close to being perfect. And I'm still learning and I'm still trying to improve and I want to be a better mother to you. So I want you to pick one thing and tell me, right? And you should have seen their eyes. They're like, what? What are you talking about? How can you not be perfect? What's wrong with you, right? You're an adult. Adults are supposed to be perfect. I mean, it hit me like a brick. In their little minds, we adults have to be perfect, right? We have to be perfect because that's what they're told. That they as children, they're the only ones who don't know. We've got it down. They're the only ones who need to improve and keep learning. And on that day, it really opened my eyes. And anyway, I had this annoying trait, right? Where I go, I sigh like that. And out of irritation, and I talk to her with this frustrated tone when she does something naughty. And so she picked that as what she wanted me to improve. And she said, Ami, it makes me really feel bad about myself. And I don't like what your face looks like when you sigh. And it was fair enough, right? So I took a step back and I said, okay, let me try and improve. And I genuinely did. I tried hard to remind myself. And over the next weeks, sometimes months, I do it and I ended up doing it. And I don't sigh anymore and I don't make that face anymore, not just with her, but with anyone, right? She made me a better person. But what hit me most was about 2 weeks after that, when she realized that, oh my God, my mother's actually changed and this is great. She came to me and said, okay, Ami, I know what I want to change, right? So she has this crazy habit, right? She laughs. She laughs when someone's correcting her. And it irritates the daylights out of me, and she knows that. So she said, this is what I want to get better at, and I'm going to try and improve it. Her intent was enough for me, but it wasn't enough for her. She did it, right? So every time I lectured her on something, which we mothers do quite a bit, she would first make this frowning face, right? So she'd make the frown so that it doesn't allow her to laugh. So for the first few weeks, she had to force herself to improve. But with time, she didn't need to frown anymore because she had done it and she had improved. And I couldn't be prouder. Now, I believe that it's because I was vulnerable enough with them to accept who I am, to show them that I'm not perfect and to share my journey of improvement with them, right? That made me an equal in their eyes. It showed them that it's okay to not be perfect. And that all of us, any of us, can always become better if we try. And the same with your team members. When I joined Atlas, just like 2 weeks maybe into it, those of you who know me know that I love talking and I can talk nonstop, right? My husband would attest to this. My best friend would attest to this. Anyone that know me would. So of course, as soon as I sat at a board meeting or a meeting, when somebody I feel that they're attacking my team or saying something wrong or they need support, I would jump at it and I would say something to make sure that I've got their back. But to be honest, I didn't know much about the company. I didn't know enough. Now, with my team, all teams that I've had, I've kind of tried to have very honest conversations. So with this team, I made it kind of a process where we have an hour every 2 weeks where we have honest conversations about where we get a chance to say one thing that we appreciate about another and one thing that we would really like for them to improve on. So today was my day. I mean, that day was my day for getting improvement or getting suggestions. And there was this one girl, Gayatri, I still remember. She said, Damini, I'm sure you do this with good intentions, but when you speak at meetings without knowing the full picture, at times it makes it worse for us. And she was right. I mean, I just took a step back and I said, okay, I want some help from you. And we made a pact that day that they would give me some indication, clear their throat, a wink, whatever it is, each time they feel that I overspoke. And they did. It worked wonders because I listened far more than I talked. Hence, I learned about the culture, about the industry, about the people much faster than I would have, which allowed me to add real value in their perception. I could speak up with knowledge and authority when needed. So what's important is that you as the leader should not feel that you're the only one who's right and you're the only one who has value to add. That day I wrote her name on the whiteboard that was in my office, along with the learning that she gave me, with many more to come from many more team members. This did two things, right? It made them see me as an equal, just like my kids did. And they saw me, or they perceived me to be strong enough to be vulnerable, to be open about my shortcomings, because they felt that I was confident enough to fix them. Now, what that did for me is that it opened gates for them in return to be vulnerable and open about what their shortcomings are and what they want to improve on, which resulted in all of us really just getting better, right? So it's number two. We come to number two. Number one was self-awareness and vulnerability. Two is really investing time to get to know your team. Now, the key to solving a problem is first to accept that there's one and then to understand it in the right context. Same goes with people. You need to be inquisitive. Listen to what is not told. Observe body language, how they react to different situations. Really get to know the individual outside of the job role. Who they are, what makes them tick, what drives them, how they think. It's so important because at the end of the day, it's only when you know what makes them want to be better that you are able to ignite the best in them. And this is not going to happen through the half-hour one-on-ones that you have. It's not going to happen through a questionnaire that you send them. And it's most definitely not going to happen through the, hey, how's it going that you say in passing. It only happens if you spend quality time with them, invest on them so that you really get to know who they are and what drives them. So back in school, which was Visakha, they expected all of us to be the smartest in the island, which I followed for the first few years, right? But however, as time passed, I learned that singing and dancing and climbing trees was far more interesting and entertaining. So that's what I did. About 6 months before my ordinary level exam, I was sitting for my maths term test. I went completely blank, right? I didn't know. I couldn't answer any of the questions. So I ran down to, those big booths that we had of telephones, the silver booths. I went with this big 2 rupee coin and I called my mother and I said, I know I've never done this before, but I don't know how to answer this paper. I don't know anything and I don't want to be here. Now, I had enough trust in her to be able to go to her when I failed, to be able to tell her. And she just said, okay, go and tell your teacher that your stomach hurts. I'll come pick you up. I mean, I was baffled, but I was elated. My mother lied to Visakha Vidyalaya about the fact that I had a stomachache. She came to school, picked me up and brought me home. And of course, I was expecting a really long lecture waiting for me when I got home, right? All she did was look me in the eye and say, I know you. And I know that there is nothing that you can't do, only if you want to. If you want to be a singer, you will be the best one. If you want to be a dancer, you will be the best at that. How do you react to something like that? How do you let a person down when they believe in you to that level? I told myself at that point, that's it. I'm going to change. I permanently glued myself to my books and my table and my chair for the next 6 months. And the next time that I had to use that same booth, the telephone booth with another 2 rupee coin, was from school to call my mother and say, you know what, Ammi? I actually got 8 Ds, a D for maths, and 2 Cs. And even though I was surprised, she wasn't. You know why? Because she knew me. She took the time to understand that pressure and force didn't drive me. She understood that kindness and understanding is what brought out the best in me. A similar experience that I had again with my team, right? One of the members, even before I got to know him, as soon as I joined this team, I was told by people, he's not suitable for this. He doesn't perform well. You might have to replace him. And the first thing I did was forget everything. I said, okay, I'm going in with a blank slate, right? And when I got to know him, I wanted to make sure that I invest enough time to put him in these situations where he had to deal with different personalities. Now, in observing, what I realized is I observed how his face fell when a superior would compare him to another, or how he cringed when, he was pushed by challenging him. Now, there are personalities that are driven by challenge. They're driven to prove someone wrong, but his mannerism, and actions showed that he was most definitely not one of them. And this made me, realize and believe that it's probably trust and belief and a little bit of faith that would drive him. He was, long overdue for a promotion. So I had the choice of giving him an ultimatum of a level of performance that I expected from him in order for him to be promoted. Or I had the choice of saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to trust you because I've seen capability in you, and I'm going to give this to you and expect you to prove me right? Emotional blackmail, if you may call it that. But that's what I did. So I spoke to him, and I still remember saying, I know there's something that's holding you back because I see the capability and the capacity that you have to perform. But you're going to have to invest time in yourself, take a step back and really understand what it is that's holding you back. You need to understand what you need to do to improve yourself, right? With time, he proved me right. He got the promotion before, and he proved me right that it was most definitely worth it. Now, keep in mind, this does not work for everyone. I've had team members that I, in fact, have had to speak down to. I've had to make them feel small in certain ways by asking them provoking questions, just so that they feel challenged enough to prove me wrong. And that's worked as well. So at the end of the day, honestly, it's just about investing the time it takes to get to know your people, to know what drives each individual, right? And really, if you think about it, the greatest example you can bring here is the military. In the military, these guys live together. So they spend much more time with each other than they ever would even with their families. And I believe that's what allows them to have such a strong bond of brotherhood and trust their lives with each other on the battlefield. So investing the time to get to know your people is really the secret sauce. We go to number 3. There's no point knowing them if you are going to be judgmental of who they are because they're different to you. So number 3 is to be non-judgmental and accepting, right? Again, it takes me to an experience with one of the guys in my team. He was one of the macho ones, the ones that decided that I don't need an empathetic leader, because I'm tough and rough and I can ride it out. And there was once when he was leading a team and he found it difficult because his team wasn't performing to his expectations. He didn't get it. He didn't get that they were not capable of doing that, right? Now, I had a choice of sitting with him and saying, people are different and you need to take the time to understand who they are, what ticks them, be emotional about it. But all of that would have just flying over, it would fly over him because he wasn't the person who was okay with open conversations, right? So what was needed of me there was to sit down, relate to him, speak to him with provoking questions again that made him feel that he came up with the solution, that he's the one who had the idea, he succeeded, which would make him feel good about himself and hence perform well. Now, is he ever going to think that I had anything to do with it? Absolutely not. Should I expect him to think that? Never. All that's expected of me as a leader is to understand who he is, what drives him, and just get him there. But do you see that he too, as a macho guy, needed a leader to be empathetic enough to understand that, to know who he is, to not judge him, and to drive him the way that he needs to be driven. We get to point 4. Point 4 is to be patient and accepting. No one learns to fly in one day, especially not yourself, right? So when it comes to deciding and figuring out what is that one thing that I want to improve, or when you see a team member trying to improve something that they've highlighted about themselves, you need to be patient. You need to give them the time, right? And also remember that as leaders, you may have times that you blow out, but then you take a step back and do damage control. If you remember when the little one rushed in when I was at a meeting, I blew it, but it's okay because I'm human. You take a step back and you say, that's fine, I'm going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. I want to change, but I need to give myself the time to do it, right? And I mean, no one's taught me about patience as much as my husband has, right? I used to be a royal pain. Well, I mean, he would have a problem potentially with me using past tense here, but I believe it's past tense. But seriously, I was such a kid, right? And I used to have expectations of him that was so unfair. I remember as soon as we got married, if there was some misunderstanding or an argument, I would go sit next to him. And he would just want to be left alone, calm down, to figure things out and kind of deal with it his own way. But no, I wanted to impose my way of dealing with it, right? I went to him and all he wanted was to stop me from yapping and asking, what's wrong? What happened? Tell me, I want to fix it. Let's do something, apparently being empathetic in my point of view. Now, it took a great deal from me to identify this as a trait that I needed to change because he didn't have the same need to correct a situation the way I did. But it took a great deal of patience from him because traits like this, they're hardwired. They're not the ones that you can change in a week or 2. They take time. And while you do it, one thing that you need, trust me, I'm telling you from experience, is patience and acceptance in the meanwhile. I have no doubt in mind that I was an absolute kid who was a pain, but I also have no doubt that he accepted the kid in me, dealt with it, and stayed very patient till I grew up or till I grow up, right? But the point being that when you see them trying to improve, it is very important to recognize it, to validate it, and applaud it while being very patient. Now we come to the last point, which is being honest. Okay? As a leader, you've got to make really tough calls at times. Tough calls in having to let someone go because they are a poor performer and you find that the right fit for them is outside. Or sometimes in having to someone go or having to let a team member go because you need as their leader to make sure that you're doing what's right for them, for their individual development, right? Well, the last boss that I had, he is the most exceptional leader that I've had. He instilled the love for learning in all of us and made each of us grow and become a better person every day so that the benefit of that comes through to ourselves as well as the organization, right? And he somehow knew what drove each member, right? What different thing drove each of us. And when the time was right, he let us fly. Of course, he says that freedom is never granted, that it is taken. But he created the environment that allowed us to take it. So again, in all fairness, you need to know when you have to be honest. You need to know that as a leader, you have the responsibility of the people that you are leading, right? I wanted to go for this job role outside, and at that moment, I trusted him and I believed in his want for my betterment enough to go directly to my line manager for a recommendation. And this is very rare. And let me tell you, he was the least emotional, least touchy-feely person that you would ever find. But the level of empathy that he led with was honestly phenomenal. And all he asks for in return is to pay it forward. And that I most definitely will. You've been listening to me for quite some time now, and I've been yapping again for quite some time. So we're going to kind of summarize what we talked of for now, right? So we understood that empathy was trying to imagine, experience, and really understand what another person feels about a situation from their point of view and not from your point of view. We said the 3 misnomers around empathy. It's not by the weak, not for the weak. And being empathetic does not mean that you don't hold your team accountable. Third, you don't always have to agree with an individual in order for you to be empathetic with them. We talked of 3 benefits that you get out of becoming a very empathetic leader, which is connectivity, insight, and trust. And finally, I shared with you the 5 steps that's kind of helping me right now to go towards being a more empathetic leader. Again, number 1 was to take a step back and understand yourself. Be vulnerable and open with your teams, and trust me, they will reciprocate. 2 was to take time to really get to know them, invest in them, and be there to bring out the best in them, their best, and not your idea of their best. Right? 3 was to be non-judgmental, as you know, we have our own path. We have our own stories to tell. 4th was be patient and accepting of each one's journey. The scars it's left on them, as well as the feathers it's added to their caps. And be wary of the speed of improvement that each individual is capable of. And 5th was be honest and build them up. For you are their leader. You are not in charge. Their development is in your charge. There is a most exceptional, emotionally intelligent and creative leader that I have worked with at Unilever's as well as Hema's. And, you know, most people, she once said, most people value profits, processes, and people in that order. But remember, the only order that would work is people, processes, and then profit. She went on to say that we are who we choose to be and become. The world needs a bit of love and care, especially in environments that don't support or believe in it. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, in my humble opinion, empathy is a choice. It is an absolute vulnerable and radical choice. Let's choose it and let's live it. Thank you very much. And I am open for questions if any of you would choose to have them. Gayatri, do you want to, I don't know how to unmute you guys. I'm assuming one of you would.
Yeah, Dilvini, so we will ask them to put into the chat box. So we will take it from there and we'll give it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi everyone. Please put your questions, whatever in your mind, to the chat box. Dilvini will answer empathetically.
I'll try and answer.
Yeah.
Oh, we have one. What barriers prevent leaders from hearing the voices of staff and the families they serve? What steps can you take to remove these barriers? Okay, so very honestly, in my point of view, again, my opinion, the biggest barrier is yourself, right? Because if you talk about hearing the voices of staff, it's not always a voice. They're not going to talk. They're not going to tell you. But you need to be wanting to really understand that. So even if an employee is not willing to talk to you, even if an employee is not willing to kind of say in black and white, here's what I'm going through, you need to be the kind of leader who takes time to really observe them, right? Who takes time to figure out, should I be talking to them? Should I be kind of making him forcefully get into little, situations where I test the waters? You test the waters to see, is there something personal that's hitting him? Is there a certain emotion that makes him tick? And then you get the trend of what happens. And I think personally, another barrier would be that they are not used to a leader being empathetic, and their view of the fact that a leader is just for the job, right? Nothing else. And I've had so many like that. And I've not imposed myself on them at all. Let them be, because you're not going to fix the whole world, and you can't, and don't try, right? So in my point of view, when you do it for a certain people who are change agents, who are open to it, the others see it. And when you don't force yourself on anyone, irrelevant of what it is, right? When you don't force your opinion on anybody, but your actions are shown to have nice ripple effects, they will turn around and they will want that. Does that kind of answer your question, or did that not? Sorry, who was that?
That was Kaushani.
Sorry, Kaushani.
Any other question, ladies and gentlemen?
One more, no? Well.
Can I ask one question, please?
Yes, of course. I'll get to this one.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Seshan. I'm from Haley's Aviation. Just one question. We have a lot of youngsters in our cadre. I think even Atlas also, you must be having this, Dilmini.
Yeah.
How do you get them absorbed into work? Because in our time, it was quite different. It was actually, we were forced on to doing certain tasks maybe about 20, 25 years ago. But now things have changed. So how do you handle the younger generation as per your view?
So, I mean, it's a great question, right? And you're right. So I've had a few youngsters, especially in this team, that's just joined. And most definitely, what drove us is not what drives them. And if you kind of think of two things that has changed over time, one is that they don't really look for the job security and being in the same place for a long time and saying, I'm going to take, 40 years to kind of go from one step to another. They want quick changes. They want to know, I've learned, I've done this, I've done that, right? So I'm going to answer that first. With youngsters, they want change. They want to know that they're good, and they want to prove that, they've developed. And I had one of those. And I said, what I used to do is saying, okay, you know what, guys, come and sit here. And I still do this with some of if my team is anywhere there, they're going to relate to this, right? So I get them to sit down and say, okay, you have now gone into an interview to another company. I'm going to send you out tomorrow, right? I am interviewing you. And I say, tell me what you've done. You've spent 2 years here. What have you done to change the organization? And each time they give the answers, trust me, they're going to stumble. They're going to stumble with being able to sell themselves. And at that point, it's up to you to really navigate them to say, okay, now you tell me what's the value that you've added for yourself? What's the brand that you've created for yourself, right? And why does it help for you to create one? And what helps you to create one? Then you make them understand you don't have to be here for a long time. I mean, I don't think anyone should be forced to stay in a company because you're supposed to work, right? You should stay there because you believe that it gives you the environment to learn. It gives you the environment to grow. And there's no one, Heshan, that can do that for them other than you as the leader. So if you show them that you are a catalyst that allows them to create a self-brand for them, then it allows them to understand that they need to actually prove themselves because they failed in selling themselves to you because they've not done something to fall into that category. And then you guide them in, how do you do that? How do you either say, hey, I changed the culture of the team, or hey, I set in processes so that, we become more efficient. I mean, I can go into details, but you get the drift, right? And I think the second thing that has changed, that was the first thing. The second thing that's changed is that what I touched in my speech, that they do not, gone are the days when people accept a leader or what a leader says just because you're a leader. That's gone with the new generation. True. And I see it great in Atlas, right? When I come, there's, the people who've been there for, and it's interesting because my MD is new, but the others have been there for ages. So the others who've been there, sir, but my MD is called by his name, right? And this is, it's classic of what the difference that has come through. So you need to be strong enough as a leader to do what I was talking of, come to equal ground with them. I am no superior just because I'm your leader, right? And this is what I loved about most of the leaders that I've had, where I'm not an easy subordinate to have. My hats off to all the good leaders that I've had, right? I challenge, I push back, and I need a leader who's able to really take it. But you also need to be the kind of leader who's more than okay when they challenge, who really says, this is a need that you have, and I'm going to give you that need. So I think those are the two things that you need to kind of change in the way you manage the younger generation. But keep in mind, I don't believe in, defaulting younger generation because it is individuals. So within the younger generation, there are the ones who still listen to Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra. And hence, yeah, they would be thinking of it in a different lens. Yeah.
Agreed. Thanks, Dilmini. Thank you for the insight.
Dilmini, you have a wonderful question from Vijay Menon. Can you read it in the chat box?
All right. Wait, I missed one, but I'll go back.
Let me step in, Dilmini. Can I read the question for you?
Yes.
Please, Samra.
Okay. So Vijay actually asks you, Dilmini, we're not equally empathetic. Are there any formal steps to consciously develop this behavior? Any self-development tips to consciously be aware in our behavior? The question clear?
Yes, it is clear. But to start with, Vijay Menon here is the leader that I was talking of as being the exceptional leader that I've had in life and the one who's taught me the ropes of it. So boss, I don't understand why you're asking me this question, but I am going to answer. In my point of view, again, self-development. I think the first thing is that to understand that empathy is needed, right? Because the one thing that prevents as an individual from becoming empathetic, whatever you may call empathetic, is the acceptance that there are different levels of it. Now, if you do accept it, and if you figure out that, well, you know what, there are situations that I let my emotions control me, what I did is write it down. What I did was have a diary and say, today, figure out the moments that I messed up because I didn't think before I spoke, or because I didn't think of someone else's point of view. So it kind of forces you first to understand what prevents you and at what situations you can't be empathetic. And that gets you to a point of saying, what are those environments that kind of drive you insane, right? And then you work on how would a person become more understanding of those situations, which gives you that platform to become better at dealing with situations and hence understanding the other person's point of view and hence being more empathetic. But again, boss, I think you could have told me this. Okay, and I think I had one from Ajit Fernando somewhere. Oh, I missed it though.
No, Dilmini, he has given you a compliment. So I will read that one.
No. He had a question about a narcissistic before that. Oh, Deepal, you're here.
Dilmini, can I then ask you the question?
Yes,
oh,
please.
Yes, please.
Like I work in the investment banking field, so sometimes it's kind of full of fairly narcissistic type of people.
Yeah.
How do you deal with kind of self-assured and self-centered people who are star performers, obviously, but also have very little regard for other people? I mean, we have had national leaders, not only on Sri Lanka, in other countries also like that. But how do you deal with people like that?
Again, I think this brings me to the point where I said, the whole misnomer that you need to agree with someone to be empathetic, right? So it takes a lot from your side because it brings you to the biases that we naturally have. We have a natural bias that a person should be nice, that a person should be accepting, and that they should think like you. The first step is to break that misnomer within yourself, is to say there is a reason that that person is like that. To me, it always boils down to taking the person out of their traits. I don't believe that people are born selfish. I don't believe that people are born narcissistic in any way, right? And I think it's because of what they've been through. It's because of the environment they are facing that it pushes them to be that. Now, does this mean that you can all of a sudden create an environment to change who they are? Again, I don't think so. And this is where patience comes, where these guys are not going to change for a very long time. And I don't think you can expect it either. And I've faced so many like this. And the way I've worked with them is that, honestly, you let them be that. You allow them to think that they are that. And you can't try the whole emotional speech with them, right? You can't talk to them and understand and make them feel that, you know what, you're being selfish. But there comes a time when you need to teach them a lesson playing their own game. And I can go into detail, but it's going to take time. I think, you get my drift when I say play their own game. And that's where it takes you also kind of to put yourself in, why are they being selfish? And when you sometimes call on them, what they don't expect you to say, it takes them by surprise. And once I remember there was this gentleman that the most challenging leader that I've ever had. I was pregnant at the time and I used to cry every day. Every morning I would cry because he made me feel he was so selfish. It was all about, how much I had to do. Anyway, it was a long story. But at that point, the first thing in my mind was, okay, he has gone through hell in life to have become a person like that. What do I do to prevent myself from getting impacted by it and my job being impacted by it, right? So all I did with him was to say, great, if you're this kind of personality, how do I come to you? Not talk about the fact that you're that, but be very open with what we usually don't talk about. Usually in circumstances, there's this white elephant in the room, right? And we all choose to ignore the white elephant. We talk around it, we speak around it, but we never speak of the white elephant. So whenever he would say something, I would call him out on it. I said, listen, the person that you are, I know you're going to say this, and I know you're going to view it this way. I don't agree with it, but I get that that's who you are. Let's work with it. Now, when you're that blunt and that open, it takes anyone by surprise. And so it makes them kind of take a step back. Some of them react to it nicely. Some of them blow a fuse. But I think it's a risk worth taking. And I don't think there's a secret sauce to it, but it's kind of dependent on each person, right? I hope that kind of answered, Ajit.
Thank you, Dilmini. Thank you. Yes, it does.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Dilmini. I think with the interest of time, although the session is extremely interesting, I think we'll have to cut short now because just to keep on schedule. But
Absolutely.
thank you so much for this excellent, I'm running out of words actually, excellent session. It has been extremely useful and very relevant in today's context. And uh, you just brought in this element and made us reflect that it takes $0.000 to be kind and to be an empathetic leader. And it definitely, you made us realize that understanding is key to great leadership. Thank you so much for all the insights you've given us. And I'm sure it has been a very impactful session. The audience will vouch for this. And we would love to hear you during another session. And I'm sure we should plan a soul session question or tea with Dilmini, bringing in more insights to leadership and how we could all move from being good to great leaders. Thank you so much for your time, Dilmini. It's been a privilege having you. And I'm so honored to close this session with a vote of thanks. And thank you once again on behalf of the WiLAT community for taking time off your busy schedule and being present with us at a time like this. And yes, during this pandemic, we have all gone through enough stress, definitely knowing the uncertainties ahead of us, but then going out with grit to take on new challenges and adapt to the new normal that has basically brought forward to us. Thanks once again, Dilmini, and the audience. And I'm glad to see we have an international audience as well. So WiLAT definitely is present in 18+ countries, and we have a growing membership. So once again, thank you so much. And thank you, SAGT, for being our exclusive event sponsor for today. And I would also like to make a special emphasis for EFL for being our branding sponsor for today. And to everyone at the Secretariat for helping us put this webinar together. And my EXCO, led by Gayatri, thank you so much for being with us, supporting the initiative. And hopefully, we hope to have you all at the coming sessions as well. On behalf of EXCO, thank you, Dilmini. I'm so sorry we can't give you a token of appreciation, but sending you a big virtual hug on behalf of all of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amra. It was a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello. 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 Hello.